Run, party, repeat. Welcome to the East Coast Adventures Dirt and Vert Podcast, where we talk all things running, racing, and training to help you get ready for your next big adventure.
Learn from our successes and our failures, and have fun at the same time. Join us right here every week with inspiring guests who share their captivating tales from the trails. And remember, nobody cares.
Run faster. All right, welcome back to the Dirt and Vert Podcast. I'm David.
And I'm Matt.
And we have a guest with us today who has ran, I'm kind of in envy of the races that he's ran, to be honest, because we were just talking about, he's ran almost every race that most ultra runners dream of running. Mm-hmm. Thing from Western States to UTMB, Badwater, even Hard Rock, and Bigfoot 200. He's just got a decorated list of races on here. Definitely shows his grit and tenacity for ultra running and adventures. But Gavin, if you don't care, Mr. Gavin Woody, tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got into running.
Yeah, hey everybody. I am Gavin Woody, live in kind of 20 minutes east of Seattle, so kind of Scott Jurick's old stomping grounds with Tiger Mountain, like 5 minutes away from here. So I'm fortunate in that regard. And I'm a dad. I have a 10-year-old son, a 12-year-old daughter. You'd ask, Dave, about kind of how I got into running. It's kind of, you said I could take as long as I wanted to tell the story.
Oh, yeah.
I'll try to keep it
Absolutely.
short, but I would say that, I had kind of I wasn't a huge runner, and I still kind of, think of myself as like running is one thing that I do. And we can talk about some of these other things, but like mountaineering, backcountry skiing and things like that. Honestly, running is just easy because I can do it, by myself in the rain and in the dark, which is most of the time when I'm training around here. So I grew up in Central California, actually on a cattle ranch. And, that's probably important to know because on a ranch, you got to be a jack of all trades, right? You got to be a plumber, an electrician, a business person. You got to rope cattle and, chase them down. So all of those things. And so I still kind of consider myself like a jack of all trades, and really didn't run, but I was like in Boy Scouts, I was Eagle Scout. So, liked the outdoors and also like kind of structure, discipline, all that sort of stuff. And ultimately went to West Point and to become an Army officer. I wanted to serve my country. As part of that, you run a lot, right? Because and I figured as I wanted to be an infantry officer, and just like being physically fit and being able to lead from the front is super important. And so I started to, like in high school, I ran track, and I think on the 800, which is 2 laps, I think I got lapped one time. I was not a good runner, but, just kind of kept working at it and did my first marathon when I was at West Point. I did the Marine Corps marathon and was like walking backwards, my finish line photo. And this was way back in the day when it was like you got the little slides you had to look at to see your finish photo. And it's me like puking. It was awesome. And so I really wish I would have kept that slide. Anyway, so I was like kind of one and done, that's it. And then I went to Ranger School and Airborne School in Georgia. So that was my first kind of intro to the Southeast and humidity. And then so ran a lot there, but then was not interested at all in kind of, longer distance stuff. But then I got to Italy. I was served in Vicenza, Italy with the 173rd Airborne Brigade. And there was a big running culture there. So we just like started doing more of these marathons, and we'd go to Rome and check out the city on a Saturday, and then run a marathon on Sunday, and then, come back. And so it was pretty cool. And then I started getting into, it's a huge biking culture. So I started biking a lot, and I was like, well, crap, if I'm doing all that, I may as well throw some swimming in and do some Ironmans. And so I started doing Ironmans, and then things kind of got paused for a while because we parachuted into Iraq at the beginning of Operation Iraqi Freedom, and was there for basically 2 years. Got out of the military, came back to California, really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went to business school, went to Stanford, and which is basically the opposite end of the spectrum from where I was living in a foxhole in Iraq, and started kind of getting back into running and biking and stuff like that. But didn't even know about ultra marathons until I moved up to Seattle after grad school. And my wife and I, we both enjoyed being outside, and we climbed Mount Rainier with a guide service for one of our first kind of, big things. And I read this book called Born to Run, which I'm sure every single of one of your readers or listeners has read, and Ultra Marathon Man. And I was like, this dude is like, Dean is ordering a pizza to be delivered to, some intersection and eating a whole pizza and running Badwater and, his shoes are melting. I'm like, I want to do that stuff. And which is just kind of it gives you some insight into my mindset. And since then, I basically have just been cranking away at working my way up from 50Ks to 100 miles to 200 miles to 350 miles. I've done the Iditarod Trail Invitational 3 times. And, I can dig into more of my kind of, the races that I've done. But yeah, that's been the progression around kind of the running. But what really gets me excited is kind of, like adventuring, like combining running with mountaineering. Like I've done a few things on Mount Rainier I can tell you about with kind of mixing mountaineering and running. Done some big backcountry ski traverses. I've most recently been doing a bunch of adventure races. So last year I did a week-long adventure race in Alaska and then another one in Oregon, America's Toughest Race. And so, that involves a lot of mountain biking and orienteering because frankly, I've done so many of these like 100-milers and stuff. It's kind of fun sometimes just to kind of tune out, just follow the flags, chat with people. These adventure races, there's no GPS, there's no markings. It's like it's you, map and a compass and a team, and you got to figure out where to go. So that I like that mental challenge of trying to figure all that stuff out. So long story short, it's been kind of a winding path to get here, but I'm just honestly really thankful to my wife for letting me, just being supportive of this. And she's done a couple 100-milers as well. So she gets it and is into it. And then honestly, my body for trying to, I'm 40, almost 48 and it's in pretty decent shape, but it's like, it's not getting easier as I get older.
Yeah.
So, and that's what it'll be, as we get into the conversation, this upcoming event with Team Red, White, and Blue, the Old Glory Ultra Relay, this is going to be a real challenge because I haven't honestly probably looked at pace on my watch in probably 15 years since my last marathon. I ran the Boston Marathon. I ran like a sub-3 marathon. So that was like pretty good at Boston. But now we're going to have to like go fast day after day after day. And so that honestly, it scares me, but that's also part of my mindset. I like to do stuff that scares me a little bit. I know you're talking to Zach about that because having that goal out there is very important just to then put the work in. And I'm really big into, we'll talk more about this, but just you got to have goals out there, but it's really about the habits that you're doing every single day to work up towards that goal. So yeah, that's probably a very long intro, but just want to share all that.
No, well said. So when you transitioned into ultra running, was it a huge learning curve for you?
I guess the whole, trail aspect, because I hadn't really been running on trails. And so that's a whole different paradigm, different shoes, different gear, how do you hydrate, all that. And, but I started small. I started doing 50Ks. And by that point, I'd done probably 4 Ironmans. I'd done, I don't know, dozens of marathons. And, it also been like climbing, mountaineering. So some of the just like taking good care of your body, which I think is huge in ultra running, and also nutrition, which is also, I think, underappreciated. I feel like I had probably a better start on that stuff than somebody who just kind of goes, from kind of trying to do 5Ks into these long ultra marathons where you don't have the support and all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of cool that Italy has a running culture. I got to spend a little bit of time in Italy. Didn't get really time to do any of that. It was more for work. And we got to go to Venice for a little while, but we spent most of our time in Agredo, and there was not really, you didn't get to see that. So it's kind of cool to hear that they actually have a running culture. And then that's kind of where you caught the bug. That's pretty awesome.
Well, it's funny. I mean, so a lot of this was like the other military personnel that were there, and some of the guys that were like Italians, but they worked on base, and so they were into it. But dude, so I've done a few big races in Europe, obviously UTMB, Tour de Giants, so it's 200 miles, 80,000 feet of climbing. I don't know if you know about that. We'll probably talk more about that. It's massive, but I mean, in the spine race, it's 240 or 270, goes basically 200, whatever, on the Pennine Way in the winter, which is very cold. I can tell you about that. Dragon's Back in Wales. So it's a stage race, 200 miles over 5 days. And the thing is that the Europeans, they're so into this. I mean, there's 5,000 people that do UTMB. I mean, Chamonix, I mean, it's like, it is just like runners everywhere. It's nuts. I mean, Tour de Gens, put it in perspective, 200 miles, 80,000 feet of climbing, right? You take a normal 100, 40,000 feet of climbing would be a lot, right? There's not a single, I mean, maybe Uray is 40,000 over 100, but it's like 2 Uray 100s stacked against each other. 700 people start this thing.
Wow.
It's
That's
nuts.
awesome.
It's a whole different level. You know, we think here, you know, like Western is like maybe the biggest race. It's just next order of magnitude different in Europe.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That is crazy.
That's awesome, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
having said that, I also one of the things I really like is just the down home culture. You know, I've run, Big's backyard, you know, in Laz's backyard. And it's just like, you know, Sandra's wife's over there making some spicy chili. And it's just like, that's more my style. That's what I like. Just like the grassroots stuff.
Yeah. I mean, some of the events like that are, you know, more local to the areas. They've not been turned into a major business at this point.
Yeah. Commercialized.
There, you know, that's where you truly feel, you know, the homegrown, see the community, the people, and like just the true aspect of it. I get it. I understand why people want to run UTMB. I mean, I would like to do it at some point too, but you know, I think there's something special about those local races, you know, that you just, it's a different feeling. It's just a whole different atmosphere. But I will say, I mean, just seeing the start of UTMB, like you can tell like that whole community, man, they just absolutely, that is their thing, you know, like they love it. They're there to support you and cheer you on. And I think that's really cool just to see the camaraderie from the community as well as the runners.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if we dial it all the way back here, I see that like your very first couple of races were, you know, early 2000s, you know, 2006, 2008, 2009. But
you're saying I'm old? Is that what you're saying?
No. What I'm in.
I am. That's cool. No, I've been doing this for a while. People are like, how do you run 100 miles? I'm like, well, start and just keep working at it, you know, over time. Anyway,
6.
Yeah, I was actually going to compliment you because, I mean, you started in 2006, but you didn't attempt your first 100 miler till like 2011.
It was at Cascade, maybe?
Yep. Cascade.
So interestingly, I guess I know it sounds weird because most people think that I'm very risk seeking. I'm actually pretty risk averse. Like I want to finish. Like I don't want to DNF. I've DNF'd a couple of things, like I sprained my ankle and I had this like ski traverse I was supposed to do in the Alps. And so I didn't want to like screw that up. So, but I generally like, I am going to finish this thing. And, you know, sometimes it works out like Bigfoot. I didn't go into that trying to win it. I was actually training to run the John Muir Trail, which is not, you know, on Ultra Sign Up, but I actually DNF'd my first time on the jam. Do you guys know about the GMT? So it's 223 miles. And so the first year I screwed up. I took the wrong nutrition. I took these sticks of fat because I wanted like the highest calorie per ounce that I could find, which is fat. It doesn't taste so good on like day 3 when it smells. just word to the wise. So I failed after 160 miles on the JMT, and so then it's kind of prep to go back. I did Bigfoot 200, and so I like had I think a pair of socks. I didn't have like any aid station stuff, and there's like 14 aid stations, but I was just carrying this big backpack and just cruising along, and I'm winning, not because I was trying, but it was just I slept less and just kind of kept moving, and that's where I think that a lot of people I always think the transition into the longer stuff is just like be very self-sufficient and don't waste a lot of time. I mean, even stuff like just filling up water bottles or changing socks or changing clothes, like do what's necessary. But if you never have problems with chafing on your feet, or issues with your feet, like don't change your socks, you know, you're going to learn that over time. But like, I mean, Big's backyard, how many miles I went, 260 something. I wore one pair of shoes the whole time. I wore these Hoka Speed Goats. The tread wasn't looking very good on them afterwards, but that's just kind of my mindset. It's like only do the absolute necessary stuff, because any minute messing around with other stuff is just not forward progress.
Yeah. I agree with that. Yeah.
So when you showed up Bigfoot, you just showed up with a pair of socks?
Yeah, I had like a bunch of, food. I forget what I was using at that point for like water filtration stuff, probably these bottles with kind of integrated filters. But yeah, I had, like extra clothes, and, I had everything I needed, but in my bag, just because I wanted to be self-sufficient to go and prepare to run for the John Muir Trail, which I ended up then doing the next year. But there was a ton of smoke, and so it was like I was on kind of FKT pace at the time. It was like a little under 4 days, which the FKT for unsupported. And there's actually a movie called Unsupported, which is kind of good, which kind of tells a story about the FKT attempts on there. But then it was like there were a bunch of wildfires, and my lungs blew up, and so I ended up coming in a little, I think 4.5 days or something. So still pretty good, but I mean, I was out there. It was like no sleeping bag, no stove, no. I have a little like plastic, bivy sack, and I mean, I had a good weather window. So where I was going with all that is I think of myself as fairly risk averse. Personally, other people would probably say, what is this guy doing? But my goal is like be self-sufficient. And that's why I've kind of pushed myself in these other worlds where, like on the Iditarod Trail Invitational, I don't know if you guys know that, but it's a big snow race up in Alaska. So it follows the Iditarod Trail. And there's the full version's 1,000 miles. And I was actually supposed to be up there this year, but because of the Team Red, White, and Blue Ogre, I decided that walking at 2 miles an hour, pulling a 50-pound sled for a month wasn't going to be great training to go fast. So, but I've done the 350 3 times, and so once by foot, and then I did it by fat bike, and then I did it by ski. So I was just the third person to have done like kind of all 3 disciplines. But, that's the sort of stuff that gets me excited. It's just like, hey, let's figure out some new mode of travel and the right gear, and not too much, not too little, and all that.
What'd you say the name of that event is?
So it's called the Iditarod Trail Invitational.
Interesting.
So, yeah, and again, it's like you go start down the rabbit hole of like weird races. It's like, well, you got 100. Okay, well, now let's do it in the desert, like Badwater, right? Adds complexity. And then there's actually more on kind of the winters side of things. Like there's Sitna 100 up in Alaska, obviously Arrowhead 135, which again, I mean, I'll just tell you, I normally don't tell people about this stuff because they think I'm weird, but I ended up winning Arrowhead just because I didn't sleep. Everybody else slept, and it took, I don't know, 36 hours or something. But, that's like arguably it gets colder there than it does it's in Minnesota in, I think, January or February. And you got to, drag a sled, -20-degree sleeping bag, stove, all that jazz. So it's adventuring. It's not.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was just thinking about how miserable I would be dragging something in the snow. I hate the cold anyways, but
yeah,
it sounds. Is that the picture you sent?
Yeah, the Arrowhead picture.
Yeah. I was to say when you
the one on I think that you posted online, that was when I was skiing. I did a rod. Yeah, and that was a whole thing. I mean, I broke a ski pole in the middle of the night. I was like, had a bunch of GI stuff, which I normally never do. So I won't go into too much gory detail, but it was like one of those things.
Stuff you like.
What's that? That's stuff you like. Yeah. So that was like one of those things where it's like, okay, am I ready to, like I got to dig deep, and I need to be self-sufficient here. And so that was, an exciting opportunity to test my grit.
Yeah. Now, is that something that's like on Ultra Sign Up, or where did you even find this event at? Like, how did you know about it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know.
I've never heard. It's cool, but I've never heard of it.
Yeah. I actually don't know how I ever heard. I think it's one of those things where, it's like I heard about Badwater, which is obviously super popular. Was very fortunate to get it in my first year. And then I heard somebody mention this, like, oh, it's like the sister race. It's like also 135 miles, but it's in the snow and it's like super cold. It can be like -40. And I was like, sign me up. So, and that was Arrowhead. And so then she learned about Arrowhead, and then the people that are in that, then they're talking about Alaska, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, what's in Alaska? And then there's like 100 milers like Susitna 100, White Mountains, and then now like racing on the Iditarod Trail. So I don't know, that's just what's honestly fun. Like I learn about stuff all the time with just talking to other runners, and like I said, I like racing because it's the community. We have a couple of great race organizations around here. Rain Shadow Running, James Varner, I don't know if you know him, but he's put on a bunch of races, these 50Ks and 100Ks. And we love going there and just, hanging out. And now these are kind of family affairs where maybe, I'll run on Saturday and my wife will run on Sunday and there's a kids race and all that. So, I love that.
Yeah.
But I also just love piecing things together myself just to kind of see if I can do it. Like one time I ran from the Seattle waterfront, like up to Snoqualmie Pass. It was 100 miles just by myself, but it was really cool, like linking up all these different trails and getting chased by dogs and all kinds of stuff. So that's the sort of stuff that I kind of enjoy.
During that race, do you go over frozen lakes?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah.
Because there's a guy that did Vol State and HOTS, Jerry Palmer, and he had been
Jerry,
posting.
He's a good friend of mine.
Oh, okay.
He just finished.
Yeah, because I see him posting all the stuff that he is getting his sled ready. I'm like, I wonder if that was the race. And there it is. He's going over frozen lakes and
small world
and
everything.
Yeah,
so Jerry's a pretty good buddy. We met at Biggs my first year, and he's living in Florida, it's hard to replicate with snow, but I got sand, and that's pretty good. So he's been dragging a tire a lot. But yeah, we talked a lot about his prep leading up for this. And yeah, I was kind of bummed because I was, like I said, I was going to be up in Alaska this year because I signed up a year ago. But yeah, he and John Sharp, which is another one of his good buddies, they just finished. I think it took them like 9 days to get through all of this crazy, the frozen lakes and rivers, as well as this year there was actually very little snow, so they drug their sleds like 50 miles through these tussocks, which are basically these big grass fields, which is horrific. So those guys had a real freaking adventure.
How many miles is it?
350. it's kind of like 320, 350. It kind of depends on the year, the route. So it's
how like what is your pace dragging a sled? It's like 2-3 miles an hour.
Yeah, when I did, I actually linked up with this guy Dave Johnson, who's won it probably 5 or 8 times. He's a total legend, this guy Dave. And we ended up we were in second place. We were together, and the guy who's in first place, he ended up like 30 miles from the finish, like getting super hammered, smoked, and he had to kind of get rescued. It was this whole thing, but we ended up winning that year, and it took 5.5 days. So I can't do the math right now in real time.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
To be honest,
300 something miles in 5 days in the cold, dragging a sled.
Whew.
That works.
Yeah, it does get cold.
I'm guessing you didn't sleep much.
Yeah, like, I don't know, maybe a couple hours each day. I don't know. This whole sleep thing is really interesting, and a thing that honestly I still haven't figured out. When I started doing like the really long stuff, I've never slept during 100, but during the 200s, my goal was like, don't sleep for like the first, day at all. Like try to go 36 hours or more, without sleeping. Like, I've done Bigfoot, Moab, but this year I did Tahoe 200 last year, and Candace Burt.
Mm-hmm.
So she's put on all these 200s, and to her credit, she does an amazing job of organization for these things. And but this year, like at Tahoe, I wasn't going into it very well trained, and I decided to sleep like, probably at least 90 minutes each night, and that really helped. Just a 90-minute sleep cycle. The way I think about it too is from an efficiency standpoint, it's actually not 90 minutes because you got to get in, get your stuff ready. Tahoe and these other, bigger 200s, they'll have like kind of sleep stations where you can like send gear bags ahead of time. So I had like a sleeping bag at like these 3 strategic locations. So you got to like pull the bag out and get ready and all. So it's really 90 minutes of sleep is probably really it's not just an hour and a half, it's kind of 2.5 hours because, 30 minutes to kind of set up and 30 minutes to break down sort of thing. So that's where I'm always like, do I really want to do that? Or should I just like kind of sit down on a log and put my head in my hands and then fall asleep? And then when I fall over, then it wakes me up and then I keep moving. Generally my dirt nap strategy, but I think maybe I'm getting a little wiser in my older age, or that, a good sleep cycle. You guys were talking about this with Zach earlier about like a good rest and recovery will actually, on average, you're able to, when you are moving, go at a higher pace or a faster pace. Like I said, I'm still learning myself.
I think that's an always learning evolution there. So
once you think you got it figured out, something changes.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, I mean, you do your first 100. Did you have any major issues doing your first 100 miler? Was there like anything that was?
Cascade Crest, that was one just right up the road, beautiful, on the Pacific Crest Trail. And like my knee started hurting. So I was kind of like running at the 50 miles. I was kind of like running sideways for the first 50, or the last 50, which didn't feel great. And so, that was tough. And what's not shown on there is I'd done this thing, I think maybe the year prior, but it wasn't. I did this thing with two other buddies. It was called the Rainier Triple Threat. You probably haven't heard of it, but we biked from my buddy's house in Seattle. Essentially, it was about 115 miles to Mount Rainier. And then I don't know if you know about Rainier, but it's just about 14,500 feet. It's a little shorter than Mount Whitney. So it's not the tallest, but it's super glaciated. And typically climbers will climb over like 3 days. You kind of go up, to a certain point, 10,000 feet, you kind of acclimate, and then you maybe make a summit push the next day and then come down. So anyway, we did the bike, and I'd climbed at that point, I'd climbed Rainier 8 times or something maybe. So we biked down there. My wife met us with all our climbing gear. We climbed it, came down, and then there's an amazing trail around it called the Wonderland Trail, which is 93 miles. And so we then ran the Wonderland. And so we called that the Rainier Triple Threat. So and that was my longest run at that point. And it was really freaking hard. I had crazy tendonitis and everything. And so that was kind of like 100. I mean, it's an amazing trail. I've run it with my sister in a single push. I've run it with my wife. We did it over 3 days for one of our anniversaries, and it's just absolutely stunning.
That's awesome. I mean, and that sounds like an adventure in itself, the triple. That's kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, and then just since we're on that topic, I did this thing called the Rainier Infinity Loop with another guy. And so we ended up going from doing the normal climbing route. It's called the Disappointment Cleaver. So, ice axe, crampons, rope, all that stuff. Went to the summit, then went down the other side. And then we hooked into the Wonderland and then ran the Wonderland. It's basically like a third of it back to the start. And then we climbed it again down the other side and then ran the 60-mile section over. I don't know. So it kind of makes this like infinity loop sign. It was like this kind of famous climber in the Seattle area. He always wanted to do this, but he was killed in rockfall in Patagonia. And so always wanted to do it. So we did it as kind of a tribute to Chad Kellogg. And so that was, again, it was just super cool. We're out there with like, we're in basically tennis shoes with crampons strapped to our feet. And, we were both experienced. So that's the other thing that I would say is people who want to go, longer, or higher, or faster, or whatever, sometimes they don't have those skills that are needed in terms of real mountain travel. And that's where people can kind of, get in trouble because I always like to say things are great until they're not. Right. Yeah. Especially in the mountains, weather changes. I mean, look at all those guys in China that died because they didn't have the proper gear. So I generally err on the side of taking more and thinking like, okay, if I have to stay out, like if I sprain my ankle and I'm literally in the middle of nowhere, can I survive a night out here? Right. It might not be comfortable, but can I survive a night? Like that's my kind of litmus test on how much gear am I taking. Sure, it might be Bluebird, but all of a sudden it gets cold and windy and rainy and things go sideways.
Yeah, you never know when the elevation's changing like that. So
yeah,
further up you go,
it's cold.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of cool that you all do kind of like your own thing. You do, you just make up your own routes, and even some stuff are like, probably known around the area that people do those routes, and you do that. So that's pretty awesome that you just have a group of people, even with your wife, that you go do that with. And I think you said your sister, you ran the loop with your sister too.
Yeah, we just did that this past year. Yeah, she's a doctor, and her brother-in-law's a trauma surgeon. She's an emergency medicine doc, and yeah, finding time to do that. So we're just like, hey, let's do this thing in a single push. And we thought we'd do it in like, I don't know, 28 hours. It took us like 36. I mean, it was tiring, but it was awesome. She's a great running companion. Yeah, she's run hundreds and she paced me at Western States 10 years ago, and then I paced her 10 years later.
Oh, that's cool.
When she did Western. So that was pretty cool. So yeah, my sister
awesome.
was awesome. And my wife, Sarah, did Orcas Island 100, which was not a smart race to start with. That was it's like 35,000 feet of climbing or something. I'm like, you sure you want to do that as your first one?
What did you think about that decision after?
Yeah, that was tough, but it's neat. I mean, we're, like I said, we've got 2 young kids, and just trying to inspire them. Like, they're not. If I say, hey, let's go for a run, they're like, eh. But if we've also been doing more orienteering, kind of going off on a tangent, but that's been neat, because with these adventure races, knowing where you're at is the most important. It doesn't matter how fast you're going if you don't know where.
Yeah.
And so it's been good practice for me. There's a good orienteering community around here with these typically shorter races, but they do these things for kids, or you can do, bring your kids along, and it might just be like a couple hours. But if they're like, hey, let's go run and find these little orange flags in the woods, they're like, hey, that's awesome.
I'm guessing that helped you a lot with Barkley.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I had a pretty decent foundation as a infantry guy, a soldier, because there's a lot of nav, and I first went to sapper school and then ranger school. So that I had good fundamentals, but it's different when it takes a lot of just shots on goal to just figure it out. And then definitely in Barkley, I was worried, because you hear about just how the navigation can be so challenging, and I actually did pretty well on the nav. But I made just a rookie mistake and didn't take enough gear. It went from like a super hot, humid day, got super dehydrated and smoked. I knew weather was going to be coming in, but I took my like light rain gear, gloves and stuff like that. And just, it was like sleet and hail, and just basically got kind of not hypothermic, but pretty darn close. And where we were, so I had done a full loop, and then it was kind of getting to the halfway point on the next loop. But like once you start that, from that halfway point, you're like way out there. And so I just made the call to come back, and, it was just disappointing because I had trained my butt off. But honestly, having been out there, and I'd been pretty experienced and done a lot of stuff, and holy shit, that is a tough race. I mean, it is just insane how steep it is, the navigation components. So, I mean, I am grateful to Laz that he has kept that thing going to really push people to the limits of human endurance. It's so awesome.
I mean, that trail, you said it best. And the last thing I would finish with is it's just a gnarly trail.
Yeah.
It's rough. I mean, you experienced that loop, so I don't have to say anything else, but I'm just the sawbriars and everything else between all of that. It's definitely different, which is cool, because I think that's the attraction, is just having something different like that people can't really. I mean, you're not going to get your average Joe to go out there and say, well, it's my first 100-miler. I'm going to give it a go, because you probably won't ever see them again.
Right. How that nobody's died out there is a little bit surprising. I mean, Last tries to bring people in that, aren't going to die, but yeah, it's special. Yeah.
It really is. But yeah, I mean, you've done a lot of special races, which is really cool. I mean, different special across the board here. Tell us a little bit about, your experience at UTMB. That had to be a pretty nostalgic thing to do. Did that happen while you were in Italy, or did that happen after the fact?
No, it happened after the fact. And actually, there's a little bit of an asterisk on it. I had these 3 other friends at grad school. And one of them, he actually kind of got me into ultra running a little bit because he'd done Marathon des Sables, which is a big stage race in, I think, Morocco. And so he'd done like some large stuff. I was like, oh, wow, that's cool. So I think he kind of turned me on. His name's Sean. And then we had this other guy, Eric, and then Kermit, and we all were all super tight friends and started doing more adventures. We ran across the Grand Canyon the first time, the full rim to rim to rim together, which is amazing. And I've now done it a couple more times because it's just such a freaking rad experience. And I don't know who came up with the idea, like, hey, there's this UTMB thing. And so we signed up as a team and got in like our first year. And we all had young kids at the time. And I think we had the youngest. So we flew with our daughter when she was like 3 months old. And, I'm not a big advice giver, but, I'm sure a lot of listeners are like, have kids or young kids. And, our philosophy has been just get them used to travel right out of the gate. Don't say, oh, well, when they can get to this point, then we'll travel. Basically, when their head is like strong enough to where it's not going to like break, their neck's strong enough, just get out there and just do stuff. Like you'll figure stuff out. Like we went to UTMB, we hiked with her in Patagonia. We did this big like 50-mile backpack trip with her. And so anyway, so that's been part of our philosophy. I mean, it's a lot of logistics, but just like get out there. So anyway, long story short, there was a bunch of logistics just getting to UTMB. But then at the last minute, it was shortened to this 60 to 100K. So basically 60 miles. So we did not do the full loop around the mountain, which was a bummer, but it was still an amazing experience. I mean, it was basically, it had snowed so much at the high passes, it wasn't safe. And so that's happened in past years. And so it was still a very, challenging experience because here we got, 4 of us together, getting cold, the route, and the aid stations, they give you like cheese and salami. And it's like, there's no goose. So it was our first experience with European running, but also just so many people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's I think it shows on here 1,027.
Yeah.
That's insane for a race.
Yeah, it's crazy.
What, so, at that point now you've done 50Ks, you've done 50 milers, you do UTMB, you've done a couple 100 milers. I think you've done Western States right before then.
Mm.
And then I see that you start to jump into some longer distances. And there's one on here I've not heard of. And I want to ask you about it, but it's Pigtails Challenge, 150 milers.
Yes, this is another story. So at that time, I'd mentioned that year we had traveled to Patagonia with our daughter. So I'd run to UTMB. We traveled to Patagonia with our daughter. And then I was working at Expedia at the time. I was an operations executive. I led one of their big contact center teams. And Expedia was trying to get me to take this job in Singapore. And so they flew us out to Singapore and wined and dined us and all this other stuff. And with our, I guess Sienna was like 7 months old at the time. So cruising around there with essentially a toddler was fun. So we get back from that and we're trying to decide whether or not to take this job. And I went backcountry skiing with a buddy and I was like, yeah, they get this awesome job. He's like, dude, you would hate that. Like Singapore, it's flat, it's hot. And I was like, yeah, you're probably right. But I was still thinking about it. Long story short, Pigtails is starting this, I think, on Memorial Day. And it basically does this 10-mile loop around this lake near here called Lake Youngs. Sounds really nice, except you can only see the lake like one time through the barbed wire fence. It's basically so it's not beautiful at all. It's basically on this kind of gravel loop. And you basically kind of go one way and then go the other. And I had signed up for the 200 mile. Well, then my wife and I were up the night before talking about, should we go to Singapore or not, blah, blah. I slept in. I get up that morning like, oh shit, I missed the start. And so I messaged the race director like, hey, I missed it. Can I drop to the 150? And she said, yeah, sure, go ahead. And so I came out then a day later because it started like the 200 started on like Thursday morning, then Friday morning, then the 100 started like Saturday morning, something like that. And so I go out there and then to do the 150, but then I was like, shit, I wanted to do the 200. So I just kept going and did the 200. So even though it shows it's 150, I just did it the 200, which I ended up winning. So anyway, it was like just a funny, stupid story. Anyway, that's kind of my mindset. I was like, hey, I'm out here, like, may as well kind of knock this thing out. But that was my first, 200 mile. And then I started getting into like, more of like the mountain 200 stuff.
Did you, well, first off, what did the race directors think when you just kept going after you won a 150-mile race?
Yeah, she was cool with it. Yeah, she's a legend herself. So this woman, Van, she's called Pigtails. Anyway, she has done so many races. I don't even know how many ultras. It's just insane. She's just a total machine. I don't know if she's done anything out on the East, but she's super prolific. Everybody knows her.
That's pretty awesome. I love that her nickname's Pigtails.
Yeah.
He's done that a few times.
Well, let's talk about the infamous Badwater. You've done, so obviously you just did your first 200 miler, even though it was only 150, and you decided to run an extra 50 miles for fun. Badwater, was that something that was like a bucket list, or did you just find that and be like, oh, this one looks like it's going to be hard too, I'm going to do it?
Yeah, I think it was on the list. It's like everything's the hardest, right? And I love Badwater, and they also do a good job of saying, it's like the hardest thing, but there's so many, the hardest things out there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was on the bucket list because it was so well known. And so, I went into it actually really injured. I think I'd run Hurt 100 before all that, and I DNF'd, but then I like went back and ran it. But I had been injured or something was happening. I mean, I could barely run, but I finally said, hey, I'm going to go out here and do Badwater, but on very little training. And in my hundreds up to that point, I had, except for Western States, I'd never had a crew, never had pacers. And so I told my wife, sister, and brother-in-law, like, oh, maybe meet me, because you have to provide your own support crew. I was like, oh, maybe meet me every like 10 miles or whatever. No, it was like every like 2 miles. Like they were, they parked the car and I'd come up and eat watermelon and stuff. It was definitely very challenging. I mean, it would have been even if I'd been well trained. So just getting up there was definitely a struggle. So it was not my best performance in the world. But again, I don't care how well I do. I just want the experience. Yeah. And sometimes it just works out.
Well, what's interesting is you ran it in 2014? I'm trying to remember. But what's interesting is the year you won it is a guy that lives over here in Ohio, Harvey Lewis.
Yeah, it was a good buddy of mine.
Yeah, you won it. Harvey's awesome. And then another familiar name that DNF'd this race would be Mr. David Goggins. That must have been an interesting race because, and then David Clark, another awesome ultra runner. I mean, there's a lot of good names on here, which is kind of cool to see in such a small field. That's what I was looking at, because this is 2014. My goodness, it's like 40 people. I mean, 40 people now in Badwater, that's not even, I mean, that's usually the DNF rate.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I can't remember what. It was the year they actually had to change the route. And so we actually went on this dirt road up to this ghost town and back. It was still like the same distance, but it was like there was some pissing match with the national park or something, or the land manager. So it added a bunch more elevation to the whole thing. So I don't know. But it was a long time ago.
But I was looking at that wrong. Matt just caught that. There was 82 finishers. So
he finished 40 something.
Yeah.
I mean, overall, was there a part of that race that surprised you, like with the heat or anything, or did you just kind of like do your thing and took your time? And
yeah, it was definitely. I mean, the heat was definitely harder than I think I anticipated. And I mean, I had tried to go, even though I wasn't really running prior to it, go in a sauna. I took this little like exercise bike thing in. I was trying to like work on that. And then I like gave myself second degree burns because I touched the metal part. Anyway, so I tried to prepare for it. But yeah, it was definitely super hard. I mean, with the heat, no joke.
Do you think up to this point that was the hardest race you had done?
Probably, yeah. I think I'm trying to think what else. I mean, Hurt. I think I'd run Hurt before. I'm trying to remember when I did.
Yeah,
Hurt.
you did. Hurt was 2014 as well in June.
Yeah, I had a whole slew of kind of races in this one time period. Yeah, Hurt was definitely hard too. Just it's so different because it's you have the heat and humidity, but just how rough the trail is. So that was another. But it's also like the community is amazing, and Hawaii is great, and so it's also a really special experience.
What I love is that you ran them a month apart.
Oh, did I? That probably wasn't smart.
Yeah, June and July. So that's funny. You must have been looking for redemption.
Yeah, I've done a few redemption races. Like when I DNF'd, when I didn't finish the John Muir Trail, I forget what year that was. It's probably like it's probably the year my son was born. So 2014, 2015. I went and ran Plain like a couple weeks later, I think. And so I'd done 160 miles on the GMT, and then I went to run Plain. And I was telling you guys about this right before we started, but it's a hard rock qualifier, and not many people want to do it because there's no trail. I mean, there's trail, but there's no course markings. Mm-hmm. So at that time, GPS wasn't really a thing, and so you literally got a sheet of paper that said like run 2.5 miles, then at a trail intersection, turn right, go another 3 miles. So you literally have this like piece of paper that as you're trying to follow along, people get lost all over the place, and they have like rescue guys out there with ham radios, but you can like, if you go the wrong way, they don't tell you. And so and then they have one aid station. So it scares a lot of people off. Now with GPS, it's like people just follow the GPX track, but it is what it is. But it's a really special kind of really low key race. This guy, Tim Stroh, is a good buddy of mine. He runs it. And it's just, I love the feeling. It's just super down to earth, great community, and really hard. And so that was my kind of redemption race after my JMT fail. And but that was tough. And then I think I ran the Bear 100 maybe after I did finish the JMT later on. That was also really hard. That's a beautiful race too, in the Wasatch.
I see it on here, September 2015, because you did Bigfoot 200.
I did Bigfoot, yeah.
Yeah, you did Bigfoot 2. And you also done this little race called Dragon's Back Race, 292K. That's
a super cool one. Yeah, Dragon's Back. It goes across the spine of this mountain range in Wales. So it starts in northern Wales and then runs along this mountain spine with, again, no course markings. So you have to use GPS to kind of follow.
Wow.
And some of it's really technical. Like you cross this place called Crib Goch, which you can Google it. And it's super technical. Like if you fall, you will die off this kind of like ridge. But it's really gorgeous. And it was my first actual stage race where you actually have to stop each night. So you'd run, I guess it was like 40 miles each day over pretty rough terrain. Then they had tents set up with, you have a duffel bag, your stuff. And it was kind of neat because then you got to like talk to the other runners and stuff like that. So that was actually kind of cool, even though I found it really challenging to then get up and get going the next day.
Yeah.
That's as we get into the conversation, it'll be interesting as we talk about kind of this relay coming up, because that's what it's going to be like every day. Just go, again and again. And, it's a good challenge. But Dragon's Back is an amazing race, really gorgeous.
Is it during the winter?
That one is not. That's during the summer. I later on did this race called the Spine Race, which, they say it's like Europe's most brutal race.
Yeah.
That's also 200 and I don't know, it probably says 240 or 270 or something, but it basically if you go at the the border of England and Scotland. You go south on the Pennine Way, 200 and whatever something miles, and that's where it starts. And then you basically run the Pennine Way in the winter. And I think, I don't know, it's in probably January or February. So it's kind of like Seattle weather in terms of like, it could be raining, it could be snowing. It's probably not going to be sunny. And it's a winter race, but there's not enough snow to like drag a sled, but you still have to take a sleeping bag, stove, some other, jackets and stuff like that. They have kind of mandatory gear list. And then we got caught. I ended up linking up with kind of two other guys, and we got caught in this huge snowstorm. We were like post holing up to our, our waist-ish area, and it was big. It was a big challenge. That was super fun. It was really neat. But it's, you're wet all the time. It's raining, then it's snow, and that's what kind of gets me jazzed. It was neat.
Well, I've watched. So Walt, gentleman we had on here, he's done the Dragon Spine, and he was talking about it. And then I had to watch the documentary. So I watched one on YouTube. It was just, I can't remember.
For Dragon's Back?
Yeah.
Or the Spine race?
The Spine. Sorry, the Spine race.
The Spine, yeah.
And I mean, and that's why that's winter, because it kind of looks miserable in a way, like, because it looked rainy, it looked cold. If I remember right, they were like climbing over boulders on parts of it.
Yeah, you kind of go through this boulder field. I mean, it's Europe's, that part, the Lakes District. I've heard of the, oh gosh, I can't think of it, the Bob Graham Round. Right, so it's this famous thing where if you do this, you link up all these peaks in 24 hours, you get kind of inducted into the society. And I've always had that kind of sitting out there as kind of a want. But, you look at these mountains, they're just like there's no trees and they don't look all that steep. But then you get into them, it's like, whoa, this stuff's really gnarly because there aren't that many trails. You're in these like, it can be really boggy, super rocky. So anyway, I cut you off. But yeah, it's like, it's underappreciated how challenging the terrain would be, both in Wales and on the Spine up in England.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, like I said, when I was watching the Spine, I was like, that looks miserable. Like that, it's one of those things where you're like, I mean, when people look at the Barkley or Vol State, they're like, that looks miserable. And that's what attracts us to it. And I was like, that looks miserable. Like, I would like to try that at some point.
I mean, it's weird. We're total weirdos, right? Yeah.
Well, I mean, listen, I can't remember what this was. I listened to it one time, and it might be a book, but it was a couple talking. They're doing ultras. Oh, it's an Adhernan Finn, his book, The Rise of the Ultra Runner, and he was talking about it. And there's like it was one of the stage races out in the desert, and they're doing it, and she's like complaining or something. She's upset, and she says something about, why do we do this? When we have a nice house, air conditioning, bathrooms. And he turned and looked at her and he said, that's exactly why we do it.
Right.
And I was like, that's a valid point. Like, it's, you don't always need to be comfortable. Like, get out of your comfort zone, be afraid to fail, be afraid to do something, because that makes you appreciate that much more, and 1,000%. I think that's kind of what drags us out to this crazy stuff. Granted, you've done some really crazy stuff, and I love it. Like, even not on here, just talking about some of your, the triple stuff that you've done on Mount Rainier. I think that's really cool. Like, that's just something different. But it also shows that you're like an adventurer. Love that. And I just couldn't even imagine dragging a sled for 350 miles in Alaska. That sounds miserable to the point, like, I'm not sure I would want to do that. Like,
I don't even, when I put my pack on and it's too heavy, I'm like, I don't think I need all this stuff. I couldn't imagine dragging a sled with everything across the snow, and then when you don't have snow, you're across the grass and rocks. And then I'm cold, so the cold part just kind of throws me off anyway.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's, like I normally, sweat a lot, and and I can get cold really quickly. So it's one of those things where I know it's out of my comfort zone. That's kind of why I want to do it, is just so I can then feel confident in that situation. I mean, I guess, I don't think a lot about like what drives me, but I think I try to be like okay at lots of different things. Like, don't tell my wife, but my buddy, he wants to go climb like like ice climb up a peak like Friday. And so we're, kind of texting back and forth like, hey, can we do that? And I'm a decent ice climber. I'm not like, stellar. I'm just, and also, like water stuff now with these adventure races, like getting like okay with water. And so I've been doing a lot of like kayaking and pack rafting and things like that, just because, at the end of the day, I want to go have a great adventure, but I want to come back home to my family. And so putting myself in these situations where, there's some risk, but also it's kind of manageable. And if I have the right gear, can I get through this thing? That's the needle that I'm trying to always thread.
Yeah. What's the weather right now in Seattle?
It's actually like spring. It's crazy. So I'm also I run a startup, as I'm the CEO of a startup, but I'm also on the nonprofit side. I volunteer for the Northwest Avalanche Center. So we provide a daily avalanche forecast for backcountry skiers, snowmobilers, stuff like that. And so I'm not an avalanche professional. I've done a decent amount of training, but the team do that to help kind of inform backcountry users of like where there's going to be maybe a wind slab or things like that. So it's been really weird this year because we had like a great early season, and we had a lot of snow early, and then we had a super dry January, and then it's like ramped back up. So anyway, it's just been really weird. And now it's like spring. And so we're like, are we going to be skiing anymore? The fortunate thing is there's the spring skiing out here is just phenomenal because I've skied off, I think, all the volcanoes around here. So like Mount Hood and Mount Baker and Rainier and Adams and down in some in Oregon. But I mean, that is also really cool. Like you basically climb up these things and then like try not to follow crevasses on the way down.
He's done a little bit of everything.
He's got he's like, you ask this, I've done a little bit of this, I've done a little bit of that. You put it all together and I mean, it's a big adventure.
It is a big adventure.
Well, let's, one of the other things I really wanted to talk on before we get into your event that's coming up, but you've ran big dogs multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about that a little bit, but man, is this your very first time was in 2018 or had you run it before? So your very first time, had you done a backyard?
No.
Ever. So your very first time, you run 65 loops, 270 miles, your very first try. I mean, that's incredible.
Well, thanks.
What did you think about that format?
I thought it actually suited me pretty well because I was, like I said, I'm not fast, but I'm pretty good at just keeping going and staying fed and staying hydrated and staying warm, or like keep my body temperature regulated. So I actually found the format worked pretty well for me. And yeah, I mean, it wasn't even like I didn't even know anything about it, but I know. So I tried to get into. I've been applying to Barkley like 5 times or something, and I think a buddy, he said, hey, you should try to come out to the backyard or Laz's backyard, because if you do well there, maybe you can like get to know Laz and blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, okay. So it was kind of a last minute thing. And nope, I don't think really, I mean, these things weren't really on the radar. And so, yeah, just showed up to Laz's backyard in the middle of Bell Buckle, Tennessee, and set up my little chair. And actually one of my West Point classmates, he lives in Tennessee, and I told him, hey, I'm going to be in your area. And he's like, oh, I'll come and support you on the race. And I was like, I'm not sure if you want to do that because I don't know how long I'm going to be out here. He's like, no, it'll be fine. I was like, okay, man. And Justin Cook, who's a great friend of mine, thank goodness he came out, because he basically fed me a cup of noodles, donuts, Halloween candy, because I didn't know how long I was going to be out there. And so I didn't want to buy like a bunch of food. So it was right around Halloween. So I literally went and bought at Walmart, these huge bags of, like Snickers and stuff like that. And got some bananas or something. And he went and got me like some burritos a few times, but it was kind of crazy. I remember the first 100 miles. I forget how many, you can probably see how many people started, but like we were all kind of cruising and running, and then people start kind of dropping off. And literally the next 200 miles, don't remember at all. then it's like we're 200 miles in. I look around and there's, I don't know, probably like 6 or 7 of us. And I'm like, whoa, we're still in this thing. And like, yeah, Courtney DeWalter, who she was just starting to emerge onto the world stage. I think I'd run Moab 240 that same year, and she beat all of us by like 10 hours. You know, it was like, holy cow, like, who is this runner? And she's like the nicest human being in the world. And Johan, who'd won it, I think a couple of times prior, he was out there, and some other guys. And yeah, next thing I know, I'm like, it's just the 3 of us. And we're like doing loop after loop. And at that point, it's this weird thing because you're like, well, I hope we keep going because this is kind of cool. Like, I think the farthest anybody had gone before that was, I mean, it definitely wasn't in the 200. I think nobody had cracked 200 up to that point. And so we're like way exceeding that. And then, so there on one hand, you're like, I hope we keep going. And then on the other hand, you're like, I hope these guys stop so that I can stop. And then we keep going again and again and again. And I look, and it was now nighttime. We were on the road, and the road, I've done like no road running for years. And that was just destroyed my quad. So we start this loop and we go out, and they take off because they were always faster on the loops than I was. And they took off, and my quads just like, they gave up. So I basically walked a little bit and then walked back. So I'm sitting there in the chair. They finish the road. They come back. Courtney looks at me sitting there. I didn't make it. She looks at Johan and says, I'm done. And then Johan goes and does the last one. It was crazy. So it's one of those things where what if I would have kept going one more?
Yeah.
Who knows? You know, so anyway, it was honestly, even though I DNF'd there, it was probably one of the highlights of my running experience, just to be there with those 2 awesome people and all the other runners, and then Laz and Sandra, my friend, and, you know, met Jerry out there, and Justin supporting me. So it was a really special experience.
That's pretty awesome. Was that your first experience in Tennessee at that point? No.
Yeah.
No, you had done the Barkley. Yeah, you had gotten to Barkley yet.
I hadn't done Barkley. Yeah, then I went Barkley, and then I went back to the backyard. I guess twice. I can't actually remember. I thought it was just one more time, but didn't do as well those other times.
So when you ran Moab, did you ever get to run with Cam and Taylor? Because y'all were like kind of close to each other.
Yeah, so Cam, we did, I don't know if we ran together, but I saw him at some aid station stuff. But yeah, I also hunt a little bit. I mean, nowhere near the level. I mean, it's not even like, I wouldn't even call it hunting relative to what Cam does. But yeah, I think he's an awesome guy. And, you know, the fact that he can like run these big distances, and, you know, he's so strong, and, you know, so adept at hunting. It's super inspirational.
He talks a lot about the Courtney beating y'all that year that much, and because he said he'd be going to aid stations, and how far are they? Oh, this girl Courtney's way up here. No way. She's, you know, this far ahead, and then all of a sudden you realize we are all getting smoked, and now they're like best friends or whatever, and they're always hanging out. But it's cool to hear that story of when she started coming onto the scene, and nobody knew who she was.
Yeah. Yeah, she's great.
Well, man, it's really cool to like see all the variety of stuff you've done, to be honest. Like, of all the people we've had on here, I think you've got probably the biggest variety of things you do, because you'll basically do anything that has an adventure tag to it, you know, which is kind of cool. I mean, you're definitely an explorer, that's for sure. Of all the events that you've done, and this doesn't have to be just running, but like of all the events that you've done, which one was the hardest for you? And why?
Man, that's tough. I mean, they all have an element of challenge. I mean, maybe since I haven't told this story, maybe I'll throw it in there. So TDG, or Tour of the Giants, Tour de Giants. So it starts in Courmayeur. So there's like Chamonix, then there's Mont Blanc, and they built a big tunnel through the middle of it.
I've heard of that. I don't know much about it, but someone was just talking about this a couple months ago to me, and I don't remember who it was, but I remember this. I don't know anything about it, so I'm interested to hear the story.
So it's like I said, it starts in Courmayeur, and it does this huge loop through these huge mountains in the Alps. So you have Mont Blanc, you have Monte Rosa, and so, but it's 80,000 feet of climbing, which is just insane. And I was, there's 700 starters. I forget how many people finished, but you're just basically going up and down these mountain passes constantly. And then sometimes you'll come into a little town, and then there'll be an aid station there, and in your bag kind of follows you. So different also in these European races, I find, is that you'll have like one drop bag and that moves with you, as opposed to the way a lot of the US races are, where you have to like put, drop bag A, drop bag B, drop bag C. So it's kind of nice just from a simplicity standpoint. It was the same way on the spine race. And so I was, just cruising along, and there was this Russian guy named Vladimir. His wife was like Olga. I mean, it's like so Russian, right? And I would pass him on the uphills and he'd pass me on the downhills. And so we kept leapfrogging. And finally we were like, we start teaming up, and they're just start chatting. And I'm like trying to chase him down these downhills, and it just blew my quads up. And then it started raining, and I had to I found this little excavator thing on the side of the trail and got in there in my space blanket out of the rain. It was a rough experience. But what happened is my quad, it was kind of my knee quad, it was hurting so much that I couldn't literally go downhill without just excruciating pain. So I just turned around, and this is 30 miles from the finish. And so I basically walked backwards the last 30 miles of this thing. And it was so brutal. But I was like, I am going to freaking finish this thing. So that was pretty tough. Yeah. In the rain, and it's there's mountain passes, and it's just crazy. So yeah, that stands out as a highlight or low.
You walked backwards for 30 miles.
Yeah. Because I don't know what, and it's never happened since, but I had it was, I don't know, my right knee, the quad just above it would just lock up like crazy. So anyway, it worked out.
I'm sure 80,000 feet of elevation gain didn't have anything to do with that.
I'm sure it was, totally unrelated.
And okay, so now I think you already said that this is probably Biggs, but I just want to ask, which event are you the most proud of?
Yeah, I think, Biggs definitely stands out as a highlight. Yeah, I think, I don't know, that, getting through the John Muir Trail was also a highlight because, one, I tried it. I learned, I failed. I learned a lot. I went back, based upon my learnings, because I'm very curious, hey, how do I need to dial this in? So getting through that, and then I finished actually on my wedding anniversary in Yosemite, which is where we got married. And then we had the two kids there. My wife, bless her soul, was wrangling these two toddlers and, had them there. And so finishing this thing that, had spent years, trying to do. And we had done our honeymoon on part of the trail. So it was just very special to us. And then to finish on our anniversary, and with the kids, and then with a bunch of smoke-filled lungs because I was through these wildfires. That was also a pretty special thing.
That's awesome. Yeah. How many FKTs have you tried?
I think just that one. Yeah, I haven't really. I mean, again, I'm not that fast. I'd rather do. I mean, I guess the Rainier Infinity Loop, that was kind of the only known time. There's this guy Ross, who's a running buddy. He tries to do these only known time things, but yeah, it's never really been, a big thing. I've thought about Nolan's 14. I think that would be pretty cool to do, but I don't know I don't think I'd get an FKT on it, but I think it'd have to be something really long and that very few people try to do for me to have any hope of doing it. I don't know. I'm not that into fast. That's just not where my head is. I'd rather learn more about, like I said, adventure racing and and the funny thing is, I like being a newbie on stuff because your learning curve is this, right? Yeah. When you're experienced, the time it gets to go from 0 to 90% is the same thing it takes to get from 90 to 95%, right? You learn so much at the beginning. And so this past year was really big with kayaking and pack rafting because I wanted to have that really more dialed in from a toolkit perspective for these adventure races. So I was a newbie. Like, I didn't know anything about kayaking. And so, but that's what gets me fired up. Like, be new, be hungry, be curious, rather than just like trying to chase these kind of real marginal gains out there. But that's just me.
Yeah.
No, and you're right. That learning curve is so fast, and then to actually become an expert in there, to say, it's like, that's a very slow progression.
Sure. Yeah.
That's one thing I really love, is I love learning, and that's one of the things that makes me want to do other things. Like, I'm trying to talk one of my buddies into doing an adventure race next year. I think I got him talked into it. So we'll see. Stamen better keep riding his bike, because we got to do some biking. But
yeah,
so I want to try an adventure race next year. They just look fun. I am terrible at orienteering. Like, I do. I've got to find a class this year and take it, because you tell me to read a compass or a map, and we're going to end up in a different state.
But that's I got right, because then you'll see big progress, right, as you move forward, right? So doing that stuff that scares you a little bit, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's is it in Europe? I'm trying to think of what this is called. Any other time I would know it, but most of their races, felt running. Yeah, is it feld running?
Yeah, the fells are like these hills that's like the Bob Graham round, like that's like fell running. So those are the fells.
Their actual, races that they talk about is really cool, really interesting, because you have a start line, you have a finish line. You pick your own route.
Yeah.
It's whoever picks the best route usually is the winner. Like, it's not so much about speed, it's who picks the best route.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting. It's very cool, like very different.
It's very different. And that's like, we talked about the spine race, Dragon's Back. Now I'm getting confused. The Dragon's Back, it's that way. There's no route. And so you'd get up to like a checkpoint.
Really?
And literally there would be people go to the right, people go straight, people go to the left. Like, it was just, looking at the map and, hey, okay, well, this route be longer. Okay, I'm good, but I'm going to then get hooked into a road, and then that's going to be easier. Or do I want to like go the quickest, as the crow flies, but that's going to be a lot more elevation. And so it's really about kind of looking at that, trying to get an understanding from the map of what you're going to encounter. But it's hard, like, especially once you get into, this is going down a rabbit hole, but some maps won't show if it's not, depending on the scale. You might come up on something and it looks like it's going to be fine, and then all of a sudden it's a cliff, because that cliff doesn't go up if it's within that band. So we've had that experience as well. Like, we thought that route was going to go, and then, oh no, that's not going to work. So, but yeah, long story short, it's very mentally engaging, and I think just keeping, at the end of the day, like, we should do this because it's fun. Right. And it should be like something that's like a little bit like, man, I'm not sure if I can totally, just sort of saying, Zach has, that big fitness goal. We're talking about Team Red, White, and Blue, the BFG, having something out there that, you're not quite sure if you're going to actually do it. And it's going to require, in order to be ready for that thing, it's going to require a ton of work in those daily habits that add up to that goal. And there was a great book. I know you didn't ask for recommendations, but I'll say it anyway.
I love it.
It's called Atomic Habits.
I love that book.
James Clear. And he talks about how, you have to have a goal out there, but it's really about what are you doing every single day just to get a little bit better. And this is where I think, it has implications for, like, us as Americans and how unhealthy we are. People, like, they want to, like, hey, I want to lose weight, or I want to do this thing. But are you actually making incremental progress? And so just like walk for 5 minutes, just do some air squats for like 10 minutes. Like, that's better than zero. And it's easy to get in the mindset, well, if I'm not working out for an hour and a half, then I'm going to go to zero. No, just do a little bit of stuff. That's the key to success. If you can do those very small things, all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, I'm running 350 miles. Honestly, that's how I feel. Like, I never had like, I want to go run 350 miles in Alaska in 10 years. Never even knew that existed. But because I've been just working my way up very, very incrementally, it's just now unlocked. I feel grateful that it's unlocked this world of stuff that I can explore.
Yeah. And you got to start somewhere. So
Yeah.
if starting small or whatever it is, you just got to start.
Yep.
We can all sit here and say, one day is not ever going to get here. Nothing's ever going to be perfect.
Yeah.
You just got to say today is day one and just start. And then there's so many people that I've talked to that want to do their 100-miler and they're just scared. They don't want to sign up for it. They want to do 10 more 50Ks so that they're prepared, but they really want to run that 100. And I'm just like, at some point you just got to throw it out there. You got to be ready to fail. That's the thing. I don't know why we make failure such a big deal. Like, failure is the best way to learn sometimes.
Yeah.
It may be painful.
Yeah.
But I guarantee you do not forget that experience, and you're going to take a lot away from it.
Yeah, you're going to learn way more on that sort of stuff than if you just play it super safe. So, but again, it's like, am I going to die? If I fail, am I going to die? I might want to dial it back a little bit. But other than that, why not? Just throw it out there.
Right. That's a good gauge. Am I going to die?
Die or survive. Die or survive.
Yeah.
It reminds me, was it Heather? I think Mary was talking about this the other day. I think it was Heather that had a shirt on that said, "Don't die."
Don't die. Yeah.
That's all her shirt said was, "Don't die." I was like, perfect. So Gavin, let's talk a little bit now about, obviously we had Zach on here and he's already talked a little bit about what y'all are doing, but let's jump into that a little bit. And I know you said that you're training more. You're going to have to train more for speed because that's something you've not really been working on, but you did run a sub-3 marathon. That's impressive. And did you say you done that at Boston? I mean, that's even more impressive. So good job. But what does your training look like right now? And what's your overall goal for this event?
Yeah. So just to talk about the event a little bit in case people hadn't heard the other podcast. Yeah. So Team Red, White, and Blue, nation's largest veteran-focused health and wellness nonprofit. And I'll say more about the organization in a minute. We are running the flag across the country, San Diego to Washington, D.C., starting May 2nd. So that's 3,000 miles. And there's a team of 12 veterans, of which I'm a part, and we're going to embark upon that adventure. So that's high level. And Team Red, White, Blue is awesome because it's really trying to get veterans to stay healthy before they go down the spiral of being unhealthy. And then 22 veterans a day commit suicide, which is just an absolute tragedy. And there are a lot of nonprofits that focus on kind of the acute need. But what RWB is trying to do, there's 250,000 members across the country, is work upstream and build community with those veterans through the mechanism of fitness to be healthy, right? Mentally, physically, and then have that community. So that's what RWB's mission is to empower veterans to lead healthier lifestyles. So I'm super excited about representing Team RWB in this. It's a big fundraiser for the organization to then support all the programs that they have. So as Zach had mentioned, but I'll kind of be brief, but in years past, they've done this Old Glory relay where they've linked up the different chapters across the country, and they've taken 2 months to do it. And so somebody will run the flag for a mile and then hand it off to somebody else. And so it's been a great way to bring these different chapters together. This year, they want to do something different and actually go for time. Try to go fast. And so they selected 12 veterans. It was a West Point buddy of mine. He saw a Facebook post. He's like, "Dude, I think this got your name all over it." And so I applied and got in, and we met for the first time as a whole team back in December. We were then just back in Arkansas again, there's a great training facility by the University of Health and Performance. There they let us use their training facility. And we were just there this past weekend, and we met again as a team to basically replicate what one day would look like for this relay. And so I know Zach had explained it before, but it's the 12 of us as one total team. We've basically divided up into 3 kind of sub teams just for kind of logistical purposes. And so out of a 24-hour day, each of those 4-person teams will take basically an 8-hour chunk. So the other 2 teams, one team will be staging, getting ready for one team will be running the flag, one team will be kind of staging, and then one will be up farther forward resting, essentially, doing laundry. And so that's the way it works. So then we'll kind of rotate through every single day each of those, 3 8-hour blocks for that full 24-hour. And we're trying to do it in, 17 days, which is kind of like a 7:38-minute pace. And we got to like cross over the Rockies. So it's not going to be a layup. It's going to be hard. And we just did this training and it actually went really well. We broke up into our 3 sub teams and then all raced at the same time just for sake of time. And so then we kept an average pace across all the teams like a 7:30. So it was pretty good. In case running with the flag, it's slower. Like it's super windy.
Especially when the wind's blowing.
Yep.
Exactly. So it's not going to be a layup. It is going to be hard. And then me personally, like I'd mentioned before, I haven't thought about pace in forever. It's basically how much elevation did I climb and in what time. Like that's been really my thing. I haven't really looked at distance or pace all that much. And so like Dirt and Vert, it's good. It's a good name for kind of my mindset. And now it's like flat road, like what is this thing? And so I'm just I don't tell anybody else, but I probably have like 50 pairs of trail running shoes. I have like 2 road running shoes, 2 pair. And so I'm like, what are these road shoes? Like super shoes? Should I get one of those? I have no idea. And so it's been a fun journey to then switch from kind of winter training because I had been kind of training. I did a 120 miler in Idaho in, I think, mid-January. Took like 50 hours. I was dragging a sled. It was cold. And so to switch from that.
You like to drag stuff, don't you?
I kind of into the dragging thing. Yeah, there's a theme. Little side story. Last year I attempted, it's called Fat Pursuit. It's really a bike race. And I attempted on a fat bike and I totally underestimated it. There was a ton of new snow. I got my car stuck the night before, maybe because of California and whatever. And so I got so tired and I'm pushing my 70-pound bike, because it's got the sleeping bag and stove and all this other stuff up this hill. I couldn't ride it. So I pulled over to sleep and I had this little freezer temperature gauge. So not a regular temperature gauge because they normally go down to like -10. This one goes down to like -50. And it's good because when I woke up after 3 hours of sleeping in my sleeping bag, it was -42, which is very scary. So anyway, I actually didn't finish the race because I ran out of time and I had to get back to Seattle for work. It was the whole story. But I was like, I want redemption. So this year I went back and ran it on foot and it took a long time. Fortunately, it was only like, I don't know, it was like -10. It was like super.
Oh,
it was so warm. It was nice.
Only. We're in the 20s.
But
it's freezing.
I don't know why I went down that rabbit hole. So I got too many stories. So I've had to now shift, be like, okay, I'm not dragging something in the snow at 2 miles an hour. I need to like focus on speed. And so Zach Bitter, who's an amazing ultra runner in this world of, ultra running, from like running on a track for 100 miles in 11 hours to, this weird stuff I do. It's all weird, but he's given us a training plan. And so mixing in, slower days, just kind of getting in base mileage and also speed workouts. And so that's what I've been trying to just incorporate. And honestly, it's been different, just trying to get into that zone where it's a higher heart rate and, faster turnover speed. I just haven't had to do that in a while. So it's been fun.
Yeah. And, it's probably not going to be, that's the thing about it. It's probably not going to be terrible the first couple of days. After 3 or 4 days, that's when it's going to be like, this is, I'm stiff. Everything hurts, because you're taking those breaks and that's what's going to get you. Like lactic acid's going to slowly start to build up, that soreness. I mean, it's one of those, like, any multi-day stage race, that first morning or after you take a nap and you stand up, it takes a minute for the body to work. That's going to be what's really going to start getting hard. And you get 14 or 15 days in, like, you're not kidding, carrying a flag and running a 7:30 pace. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard.
Yeah. So recovery is going to be key. I actually do a lot of hot yoga, which I'm normally like one of like 3 dudes. And, I don't know why more guys.
I love yoga.
Hey, awesome. Yeah. And I like it. That's great. And I would highly encourage runners. I mean, I'm still, my wife makes fun of me because I've done hundreds of classes. I can still, I can't touch my toes or whatever, but I'm like, well, think about how stiff I would be if I didn't do this. But it's just so good for you. And so being disciplined to just do my own, yoga my own stretching. And then with, fortunately there's so many amazing sponsors that are trying to help support us in a lot of recovery, supplements to recover, like compressions, legs, sleeves. We just played this weekend with this thing called a shift wave chair, which is really cool. It basically has all these vibrations. So you basically lay down in it. It's like a $10,000 lawn chair, but you lay down on it and it basically has all these vibrations and you're trying to breathe through it. Basically, it's trying to either like help you kind of recover and kind of get into a more relaxed state or kind of get you ready. So we're going to play with stuff like that. So there's some really cool, like cutting edge stuff that is going to be out there. So it'll be weird because on one hand, we'll have all this cutting edge stuff. And on the other hand, it'll be like, hey, we just got to like, make it happen. And we've got to we're going to be bouncing around between all of these hotels and all this other stuff. So it's definitely going to be very gritty. And that's why I'm so fortunate to be with this team of veterans, because we've all been through in all the different branches of services, men, women, officers, enlisted. So they really picked an awesome representative team of America. And to do it with folks, so even though we've just met a handful of times, we know that we trust that we've all been through similar situations and can deal with just like being uncomfortable, be comfortable being uncomfortable. So that's what's going to be super fun. We don't have to nobody has to meet that bar. Like they've already met that bar. Now we just got to just hammer the flag down the.
Can you imagine getting Gavin's application and you pull him up on ultrasound up and you're like, oh, yeah, this dude's in.
Yeah, 300, 100. Yeah, this will work, yeah.
So I have a question. I should have asked Zach this, but, it didn't even dawn on me till you just said it again. But is your coach coming with you? Is he going to be there the whole time?
So I think Zach has his own coach, right? Just a personal coach. And then like Zach Bitter, he's not going to be with us during the race. We will, we have a physician who's going to be there on site just in case, something happens. It's going to be a whole logistics train. And that's part of we have to, our job is just run the flag, but all of the support around this, around kind of getting hotels set up ahead of time, making sure that communication works, making sure that we've got food available, all of those things are trying to come together, getting San Diego all lined up when we start the race. And we don't, at least that we know when we're starting, we don't know when we're going to finish in DC. So they've blocked out a period of days to where we could be finishing, and that's Washington DC is kind of a busy place. It's not going to be easy. So anyway, that's going to be super crazy. So yeah, hey, it's an adventure, right?
So Absolutely. Are those all the recovery stuff that you're going to have, is it going to be on a certain van or are they going to set that up at the hotels?
We're still working through that. So each of the three teams, the idea is that, of course, we're one big 12-person team, but for logistics, just from a logistics standpoint, it's easier to break us up into three smaller teams. And then each of those 4-person teams will have an RV. And it will be basically operating like an autonomous unit. We can split up how we want to run. We could have, so each runner is going to run out of that 8 hours, 2 total hours. Well, it could be we just want to each run for 2 hours a day. Or we practiced this time when we were in Arkansas, we each pulled 30-minute shifts. And then once we got into the mountains, we kind of shifted a little bit. So we'll be able to, we don't have to then coordinate with headquarters to say hey, can I run a longer shift or whatever? We can operate autonomously. And so that means all that recovery equipment, we'll have an RV, we'll have all of our own kind of package. And then those teams are operating kind of autonomously. And then it's those handoff points after each 8-hour shift that will have to be tightly coordinated.
Good.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And this starts May 2nd.
May 2nd in San Diego. Yeah, on the USS Midway.
Oh, that's cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
it's crazy to think that you're going to run across the country in 17 days. I mean, it'll go by so fast for you guys. Like, that's what's crazy. I mean, while you're running, it won't, but the rest will. And that's really cool though. Like, that's something that you're probably never going to forget.
Yeah. Yeah, I just feel really honored to be part of this. I mean, one, to support Team RWB, it's such just a great organization. Getting to know the people there, they really are trying to do the best things for veterans to get ahead of these problems that veterans can face, and doing that in a way that obviously resonates with me personally through fitness and through community. To be part of this team with my fellow veterans, I mean, they're just amazing humans, and we, bonded so quickly in such a short period of time. And then to do something that I hope can, in a really maybe idealistic view, kind of represent like unifying America. We're moving from one coast to another. I haven't actually visited a lot of these states, so I'm excited to see them and just meet people along the way, because we'll have 16 hours a day where we're not running. We're going to be driving the RV. I got to rotate that. But, just to I love America, and our flag represents America. And I think we should all be united around this common symbol. And the fact that we're going to, again, be carrying it coast to coast, hopefully is a way to kind of unify our country in such a divided time.
I love it.
Do you know how many miles exactly that's going to end up being?
I think it breaks down like about 250 miles a person. So we'll do about call it 15 or 16 miles a day each. And then that kind of adds up over time. But, when it's not every day is going to be the same, right? As we're going through the Rockies, we're not going to be doing 7:30 pace.
And that's as long as nobody gets hurt.
And then you throw that in, right? So, the way I
more than likely you're going to have one or two issues where someone can't run, and you all are going to have to pick up the miles.
Slack. Yeah. So, and that's just going to be part of the deal with us. Adapt and overcome. We say in the military, no plan survives initial contact with the enemy. But the process of building a plan is so important, because then you have a baseline from which to react. So but yeah, stuff's going to go sideways for sure, and we're just going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, you've ran ultras long enough to know that of all the people that you have on your team, there's no way that something's not going to happen to where everybody's still running 17 days later. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, it could be me. I just that's the but I want to do what's best for the teammates, or for my team. So, but at the end of the day, even if there's just one of us left, we are going to get the flag to
absolutely
like that.
And the good thing is you've got such a strong support crew that if something does go wrong, hopefully they get it straightened out to where that person comes back in a day or two.
Yeah,
just keep the cycle going. So that support crew is definitely going to be important for keeping you guys going, because I mean, you never know. I mean, when you're out there for that long in the heat and, at night, I mean, just as well as anybody, stomach issues, anything, GI issues. I mean, if you're still going 2 days later, more than likely you're going to have to bow out for a little while to get that stuff under control. But
it could definitely happen.
It'd be really fun to track you guys and watch. And if people want to support this, I assume they can just go to Team RWB and donate there?
Yeah, Team RWB. And then there's a section of it for the Old Glory Ultra Relay, or the Ogre. And there's also RWB. Team RWB has a great Instagram and Facebook presence. And so that's another place to go follow. And there's lots of updates. So I would highly recommend go to especially Instagram. It's just an amazing feed of inspirational stuff. There's been a lot recently about, this Old Glory Ultra Relay. And so and because I should also say that, and Zach had mentioned it, but you don't have to be a veteran to be part of Team RWB. Like 30% of the folks of that 250,000 people are just supporters. And they also want to, you get if you sign up, you get a free t-shirt, so you can be kind of part of a community. And so that's my hope, is that we can inspire America to get healthy, through fitness, through community, because let's face it. I mean, I just heard a stat. It's 2 out of 5 Americans are obese. It's just if we want to be the best country in the world, we can't be like that, and so it starts with just of course, if somebody's had, like obese, they're not going to run 100 miles, but can they get inspired to walk 5 minutes? Like that's what really matters to me. And especially with our kids, it's just like, that's where it starts, with good education around nutrition and fitness and sleep. And so, we have, I think we've gotten too comfortable. This goes back to kind of David Goggins, which I loved Goggins in terms of, he's just like, go, go, go. But he's also, a little extreme. But his whole thing is like, you don't need the perfect pair of shoes. You don't need the perfect nutrition. Just get out and start moving. That's his core thing. And I really believe that we have gotten way too comfortable as society, and getting a little bit uncomfortable, even if it's for 5 minutes. That's the way we're actually going to make gains and become healthy.
Yeah. And we don't help ourselves either with social media. There's so much bad advice out there.
Yeah.
So much. And, there's a lot to be said about, trying to find a fad or a diet or anything that's going to work. But the one thing that's always proven is exercise. You got to start somewhere. Start with exercise and then start working on what you eat. Like that's the two things. And we obviously have fell far from that as a whole, because you're exactly right. It's a staggering statistic to look at now of obesity and unhealthy people. And I think I heard a number the other day that really just shocked me, but I don't even remember the percent now, but it was staggering. It was like one of the easiest things to do to increase your lifespan by, like, I don't even remember the number now. I don't remember if it was percent or years, but it was a big number. It was like 7 or 10 years was just exercise.
Yeah, for like 20 minutes. Yeah, I think it was just
20
came
minutes
across
3 times a week or something. It wasn't much.
I think it was even crazier. It was like 5 minutes a day increases your, like, likelihood of living longer. I mean, it doesn't have to be, I'm working out an hour a day or 3 hours a day, just small thing. Because I think what happens, what's a little bit, and this is what's kind of tough in these experiments to isolate, but when you do something, then you start saying like, I'm healthy, and then you make a little bit better food choice, and then you sleep a little longer, right? So it's kind of this snowball effect in a good way, to where you start making these really incremental improvements, and then you're aware of it, and that leads to then, again, just this virtuous cycle as opposed to this vicious cycle. And I really do believe, again, that's why I go back to like Atomic Habits. Have you guys read Outlive by Peter Attia? Yeah, you got to read Outlive. I'd also recommend Good Energy by someone, Casey Means. But there's a big shift towards kind of medicine 3.0. Sorry, I know we're like kind of over.
No, dude, you're good. You're good.
Medicine 3.0, the idea is that our current healthcare system, again, both my brother-in-law and sister are part of it, and they, it's really broken. I was talking, it's like doctors are not equipped to talk about nutrition and sleep and working out. And if you read Outlive, which there's a whole host of, it's not the first one out there, but it really talks about this guy, Peter Attia, talks about how you will not just live longer, but live better. Because medicine is really good at acute stuff, right? You get hit by a car, boom, there's the ambulance, you get to the hospital, and we fix you up in under an hour, the golden hour. For chronic stuff, we're getting worse and worse. And it's not a fair fight, because big food is there trying to get you to eat that next potato chip. And big pharma is there saying, oh, you just ate that next potato chip? Here, we'll give you Ozempic for $1,000 a month to then cure all your problems. And now, kids are going on Ozempic. That's like the worst thing in the world. I mean, and again, I'm kind of torn, because I think that for people, sorry, I'm going down the rabbit hole, but
no, you're
for
good.
People that need to get kind of a head start, like if you're like really overweight or have issues, like even walking for 5 minutes is going to hurt your knees. Like you need kind of a little bit of a kickstart. But what I worry about is getting people hooked on these things, because then it's like, oh, well, hey, drugs are going to take care of all this. No, you need to be personally responsible. And you don't want, those things might be used to mask a little bit, but once you become hooked on them, that's bad, right? So the whole point is that there's this whole world of like medicine 3.0, where it's, okay, how can we take kind of personal responsibility for our sleep, our fitness, and our nutrition? And unfortunately, it's not a fair fight, right? Netflix, it does play next automatically. You got to stop it so it doesn't like go to the next episode of Squid Game, right? It's not a fair fight. Nutrition, there's all kinds of crap everywhere. It's actually hard to eat well. And fitness, it's just, it takes, like it's uncomfortable. So how do we as a society address those things to where everybody can start making incremental improvements? Because it's not going to come from our traditional healthcare system. Doctors just don't study that, right? That's not their wheelhouse. So I'm really into that. And I think that there's a big opportunity, especially with wearables. One of our teammates, he works for Aura, and he got us these Aura rings. They're unbelievable. Even though if I had one device, I'd probably still choose my Garmin watch because it'll do sleep and, all this stuff. But the Aura is really good with sleep, and it's, constantly sending reminders. I sent me one right now, like, hey, it's time to move because you've been sitting on your butt for too long. Right. So those like small, I also have a continuous glucose monitor. I'm not diabetic, but it gives me kind of insight into, hey, if I eat, a potato versus pasta, which one kind of sparks my glucose. So I'm super into this kind of human performance element. And my hope is that these are still kind of fringe, but they'll come more into mainstream and then help just, kind of the average person be a little bit more aware of, again, sleep, nutrition, fitness, and that'll allow us to get healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So that was,
Well
sorry,
said.
my soapbox. I will get off my
No,
soapbox.
you're good.
Well said.
Yeah.
We've got a long ways to go
Yeah.
in as a whole. It's
Yeah. And I know this, your listeners are really focused on, they're ultra runners, right? And trying to get out for longer stuff. But I do think hopefully, we can, as a community, inspire people about just what the art of the possible is.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it might be a long journey to get there, but that what they're doing is inspirational.
yeah. And pick a day. You've got to have day one to start.
That's right.
Pick a day. Gavin, let's finish this off now with, I'm going to start it off with the very first question, and then we're going to turn it over to Mr. Williams here to talk about or ask the listener questions. But we asked this question for all of our guests. You probably know what's about to come if you listen to Zach's. But it's, why do you run? You've done all of these events. Some extreme things too, multi-day events, and just putting your body through all kinds of endurance activities. And you've obviously shown the grit and dexterity and tenacity to be able to do that. But why? Why do you do it?
I always feel better after I run. Even if I don't want to do it, it's raining, it's like whatever, but I will feel better. And so I have to know, and sometimes I do not want to run, but like I know I'll feel better. And so just like keeping that, those endorphins going, and I get time to think through problems and just like clear my head. So that's why I do it. And honestly, it's the simplest. We started the podcast. I can do it by myself in the rain and in the dark. And, so it's just sometimes the easiest thing to do. And so I love the simplicity of it. I love that it promotes just, it allows me to lead a healthier lifestyle. And it allows me to identify like, hey, I'm a runner. And then that helps me make better choices about things so that I can run the next day.
Love it. Did it take you a while to fall in love with running, or was it something in the beginning you were doing it for exercise?
I really did it like I said, at the beginning in high school, because I knew I was going to West Point and I knew that I wanted to be a lead from the front type of leader. And part of that was going to be being physically fit so that I could be a model of competence to my soldiers. And so that's kind of why I really did it, was kind of backing into like, well, how can I be the best leader that I'm going to be, lead from the front. So I think that's how I kind of got into it, like I said. And then there's the marathon. Oh, that sounds interesting. And then but I was like, never again. But then I just got, I don't know, just kind of got in this like this virtuous cycle around it.
All right, Mr. Williams.
All right, we got a few listener questions and then a few questions that we ask everybody.
Sweet.
I think we've already covered it, but what is the longest distance that you've ran?
It would have been Iditarod Trail Invitational 350. I think it was like probably really like a 320 or something. Sometimes you have to go this alternate route because you're in kind of like your avalanche terrain. So in some years it's the longer routes, like 350. So it's probably like literally like 320 or something. Anyway, long story short, it's been like something over in the 300-mile range.
Didn't you drag something behind you the whole time?
Yeah, that too.
So doesn't that make it like 700 miles?
Yeah. Did you have a pack on while you were dragging, or was it all on the sled?
I had just basically a water bladder. I had 3 liters of water in, and then I had like extra Nalgene's inside, kind of these water bottle koozies to keep them from freezing. So the nice thing, and then I have this like tube that comes. I mean, I have a lot of gear, dude. My garage is kind of insane.
Love it.
So yeah, so basically just a hydration pack, and I'd keep that right over a base layer, and then I'd put all jackets over that so that it just stayed on, and then it stayed warm and didn't freeze.
Cool. How long have you been a member of Team RWB?
Not too long. I'm trying to remember. I've known about RWB for a long time, and actually I feel kind of bad that I hadn't gotten involved, even though some of my best friends that I adventure with are actual veterans, like a guy that I ski with all the time. He's a Navy vet, but it's not a huge deal out here, but I feel bad. Like I should have probably like done more to support from a volunteer standpoint. So having said that, I've also been I was the board president of the Mountaineers, which is a 16,000 member nonprofit where we help people, learn how to climb, ski, kayak, like all kinds of stuff. So I've done a lot of nonprofit work on like the outdoor space, and like I said, I'm now the board chair for this avalanche center. So I'm just making excuses why I haven't been more involved in Team Red, White, and Blue. But now I'm like super in. Look, I'm all geared up. I'm ready.
I was gonna say you've jumped in feet first. You're about to run, you know, a few miles here and there.
Yeah, and it, it's funny how things just happen. I just think like things happen for a reason, and I haven't felt like there was a really good way up until this point to get involved with like veteran stuff. But now that it's like veteran and health, like it's perfect. Like this is the stuff that gets me super jazzed. So I'm just like, I just feel so fortunate to be involved in this now.
Pretty awesome. And I do want to say, like, I think after you all finish this, me and Matt would love to have a couple of you back on.
Mm-hmm.
To hear how everything went, and I'm sure there will be some amazing stories of fluids and pain and suffering. So we don't want to hide any of that. We want to hear it.
Right. Yeah, and it is funny. I mean, I have generally been like, this is awkward for me to talk about something ahead of time. I'm normally just like, I do something and then I'll talk about it because I'm not like, in a year I'm going to go do this thing. So it's a little awkward, but I think it's important because to get enough exposure leading up to the run, I really do believe that it's important to support the RWB team as they really try to get the word out to make this, a big deal and just engage as many Americans as possible in this mission.
Yeah. I mean, it's all one, at the end of the day, it's all one community. You're going to attract a lot of runners. You're also going to attract a lot of veterans. You're going to attract a lot of people that are members of Team RWB. And ultimately, like, you want them there to support you. I mean, I can only imagine how many people are going to show up and run alongside you all. And
it'll be cool.
That's going to be really cool. I mean, you're probably going to just have random people show up with American flags and start running around beside you. They may be in a pair of blue jeans and cowboy boots. Who knows? But I'm sure as soon as they see you guys, they're just going to jump in there and start running. And the more that we can help share that story too, we want to give you all as much support as we can. And that's
appreciate that.
We can't wait to see it.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. How many miles do you think that you will personally run during the relay? I believe you said 250.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really going to depend. I think that'll be like general range. And, assuming that, I don't get hurt, like, I think that's probably a pretty good guess because that's just basically the 3,000 divided by kind of the 12 folks. So, but yeah, it's really going to depend on terrain and if we're, if we're doing a bunch of climbing and stuff, those are going to be shorter miles. So, Yeah, that's what I've been. Well, actually, I haven't really been thinking about it that way. I've just been thinking about how can I like hit, basically half marathon plus days, just consistently again and again at a pretty decent clip.
Mm-hmm. Have you started using the the sponsorship supplements that you're going to have?
I haven't yet. And that's the other thing. I'm not actually a big, like, I've never been sponsored by anybody. I've had like a few folks approach me, but I think I'm not really in their target because I'm not like the best at any particular thing. I just do a lot of random stuff. So I've never been, so I just, have all kinds of different shoes and clothes and stuff like that. So I'm not like, hey, this is my supplement here and there. I do like Tailwind just because I really do like the product and the that's typically what I'll use like in Iditarod. I'll just have my bladder filled with kind of a soupy, Tailwind mix, and that normally because it's then 2 for 1. I can hydrate and get some calories at the same time.
Yeah. Okay, that was all of the listener questions. Now we have just some random questions. What was your favorite low-key race that you've ever ran?
Yeah, probably plain. As I mentioned, it's just a bunch of freaking weirdos running around in the woods with no course markings, and you get in this little, it's not even, there's actually not an official aid station. It's like just volunteers that, come up with some hot dogs and random stuff. So it's just so just down to earth, right?
That's so awesome.
If you could pick one aid station food, would it be a sweet or a salty snack?
I'm a huge fan of cup of noodles. I never eat them except during races, but I find that it's, it's salt, it's fat, and it's, hydration all wrapped up in a nice little styrofoam cup. So somebody got me like this cup of noodles shirt on, like sponsored by Cup of Noodles. That'd be awesome. But yeah, that's my favorite, even though I did throw up one at the second, but that was atypical.
I can talk about soup and throwing up.
Oh, yeah. This dude right here, Mike handed him a whole can of chicken noodle soup, and he chugs all of it. It goes down, and it came right back up.
Yeah,
at the corral.
Hey, it was a last man standing event. When someone hands you a cup of soup and says, "Drink this," what do?
Yeah, you gotta get it in.
You drink it. I drink all of it, and I handed it to him, and then he looked at me and he's like, "You drink it all?" And I'm like, "Well, you told me to drink it." I made it like 7 steps, and I threw every bit of that up at the start line.
Mm-hmm.
It was just everywhere. I was like, I just turned around and looked at Mike, and I was like, "Awesome."
That was better. That's funny. I mean, I don't want to sound I don't want this come the wrong way. I've done like a lot of the stuff that I want to do, which is kind of maybe why I've been doing more adventure racing things. So I think there's more like I kind of want to do on that side. I mean, honestly, I'd kind of like to go back to Barkley just to actually give it a better, like, I feel like the shot it really deserves.
Better get that application filled out.
Yeah. I mean, there are other races. I mean, I'd love to run like Wasatch 100, I Am Tough. Like there's and stuff on the East Coast, like, Cruel Jewel. So there are definitely races that I want to do, but I don't know. Maybe it's just part of my personality. I don't try to get too committed to any one particular thing because I know that, life can kind of happen. And, it's like this Iditarod. Like I was really geared up to do it, but then this opportunity came up. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to like, that'll still wait that, maybe never, but, this is more important right now. And I think that that's also important as we, navigate through injuries and things like that, because you can also put something out there and then overdo it. And I want to keep doing this for a long time. And so it's always trying to ride that razor edge between, okay, does this hurt or am I doing permanent damage? And I've stepped into that side a couple times, but you know what I mean? Like, so you want to like have a big goal, go do it, but don't die and don't like permanently injure.
Don't die.
Best slogan ever.
Don't die.
I appreciate
That's
it.
all I got. That's all the questions I have.
Yeah.
Well, Gavin,
thanks,
do you have any questions for us?
Yeah. I've been kind of getting to know you guys, and I think it's not really a question, but I'm actually kind of interested in like HOTS and Ball State and doing more stuff in kind of your neck of the woods. And, I've been there a little bit, but, again, in the grand scheme of things, there's so many things to do, but, these kind of journey run things that I just haven't had that much exposure to. So again, that's also what I just love about this community, because you get on and you learn about these new things, and then that becomes like a next little, like, oh, maybe someday I could do that. So yeah, I really hope to actually get on share some trail miles with you guys at some point.
Would love that. Yeah, me and my fiance, we've been toying with the idea of doing Ball State together. So we'll see. We're talking about that. But, definitely, like, if you're going to do any of them, it really depends on what you like. So, like, Ball State do you know much about all of them? Ball State and HOTS?
A little bit, yeah.
So Ball State is a set route every time. Does not change. HOTS, Laz changes it every year. You never know where you're going to start. You get the map the night before, and, it's completely different. So like that one might be like more fun to you because of the orienteering piece and not knowing where you're going. And plus if you've done plain where there's no aid station, there's no trail. Like this is basically it. Like you're going to live off of Dollar Generals and gas stations and whatever you can find. And that sounds like something you would probably really enjoy, because you're self-sufficient. That's really the whole point of this race, is being self-sufficient. And you just become so grateful in this race, because you don't know where you're going to end up. You don't know where you're going to sleep. You don't know where you're going to, and that's the thing. It's like, just like anything, if you're in Bigfoot 200 or anything like that, you're just trying to get to that aid station so you can take a nap.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in these races, it don't matter where you go. You're either going to make it or you're not. And if you don't make it, then you gotta figure out what you're going to do. And I think you would excel at that.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out how to navigate that. So I think it would be like right down your alley. Now, whether or not you've done Ball State or HOTS, that's up to you. They're both going to be over 300 miles. I think HOTS continues to grow in distance.
Like Laz making stuff harder.
But if you complete Ball State and HOTS, there's a third one that has been added, and I think it's still like in queue. They did it once.
Yeah, they did it once.
And I'm sure hopefully it'll come back, but it's called Third Circle of Hell.
Right.
And it's even harder than HOTS. But man, I think you should try it at some point. That race is definitely a life-changing race.
Wow. Okay.
It's kind of cool.
You're getting me excited. I like it.
One of our buddies, you may even know him because he's one of Harvey's friends, Greg Armstrong.
I don't know him well, but I mean, I know of Greg. Yeah.
He's the one that really got me thinking about, that race would be cool, but I still didn't want to do it. But he was the first person I ever heard tell a story about it, and he's won it. And what was funny is he fell asleep beside a stop sign or something one morning. I think he was taking a nap, just a quick nap, and he fell asleep, leaned up against that stop sign or whatever, and he woke up and he had money in his hand and a peanut butter sandwich beside him. They thought he was homeless, so they gave him money and gave him food. And I was like, "What'd you do?" He's like, "I ate the sandwich." Yeah. And I was like, "This is like I was listening to the stories, and I was like, now this is interesting. Like this is really cool." And you got to give Laz credit. I mean, that man has some of the most unique races. He's just he's just like a mad scientist as a race director. It's really cool. And to have that over here in our neck of the woods is it's pretty awesome.
I agree.
But we've also added in Georgia, one of the race directors has added a 200 miler on the Pinhoti Trail. So it's called Southern States 200. So that's a brand new race. It's 2 years going now. Okay. So that's something that might be interesting to you too, because it's actually on the Pinhoti. You run 200 miles of the Pinhoti Trail.
Neat. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, so if you ever get ready to run one, let me and Matt know. We'll give you a couple of good ones.
Sure. guys
And
get
Cruel
loaded.
Jewel is always a good one. It's 30,000 feet elevation gain, 100 miles. It's definitely a nostalgic race over here. It's been around for a while. No Business 100's another really good one. And it's Tennessee and Kentucky. It's a 100-mile loop. We've got some pretty decent ones around here. They just continue to grow. But when you get ready to run one, let us know. We'll shoot you a list of some of our favorites.
I will do that. Yeah, I appreciate that, guys.
You're absolutely welcome. We appreciate you coming on
man.
here. Gavin, anything else?
I appreciate just the opportunity to remember some fun stories. Yeah. So
Well,
thanks for having me.
we appreciate you sharing. I mean, you've definitely got a history in ultra running, and that's really cool. And just not even in ultra running, just in adventures, period. Yeah. I'm most intrigued by dragging a sled behind you for 350 miles. So that's
in the cold.
Oh, I mean, that one picture you sent, I just had to share it because I'm like, that looks absolutely miserable.
So, well, if you keep moving, you stay warm. But yeah, it's scary. It's like, do I have the right gear? So again, that's where I stepped my way in, right? It was like the first, 100 miles and, Susitna. And it was, so then I really want to be self-sufficient. And a lot of that is just, time in the saddle. Like you gotta, and so just like you said, like the only way you're going to do something is to start. Right? Put something kind of big out there that you really then wake up every day like, hey, I got this thing I got to train for, or figure out the gear, or figure out the logistics, or figure out those things. Because it's not just about the running, right? It's all the things that lead up to allowing you to perform well on that day or days.
Yeah. Well, and it's very fun to sign up for something that scares the hell out of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really is. I mean, that will drive you to training. If you're in a lazy spell and you've fallen off the wagon and you don't want to do anything, sign up for something that scares you, and that's going to definitely change your motivation.
Yeah, exactly. Can't just mail it in.
I think Gavin's leading by example on that one.
Yeah, correct.
Well, Gavin, thank you so much. Yeah. We can't wait to follow along on the journey. And after you all finish this mission, it's going to be awesome. We'll get you guys back on the podcast, a couple of you together, and we want to hear the story. All of it.
Okay. All the gory details.
That's right.
Thanks, fellas.
But Gavin, thank you, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Of course.